Excellent. So, as I've said, James is a letter, and we talked about this a little bit before, and it's a letter, broadly speaking, to all Christians everywhere. So even though it was written 2,000 odd years ago, James is kind of writing to Christians. And unlike some of the other letters in the Bible, particularly the ones that Paul has written, this is a bit different, because normally Paul writes to a very specific group of people in a specific church for a specific time, whereas James is literally just doing, right, I don't know who I'm going to write to, so I better write to everyone. And what he's doing in this writing to everyone is summarizing all of the teachings of Jesus. He's taking a lot of inspiration from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, and he's writing it in a style that lots of the Jewish people would be familiar with in the day, because it matches up to the Old Testament Proverbs really nicely. So, I'm going to read from James 5. It's going to be on the screen behind, albeit in a slightly different translation. But starting at verse 13, it says, "Are any of you suffering hardships? You should pray. Are any of you happy? You should sing praises. Are any of you sick? You should call for the elders of the church to come and pray over you, anointing you with oil in the name of the Lord. Such a prayer offered in faith will heal the sick, and the Lord will make you well. And if you've committed any sins, you will be forgiven. Confess your sins to one another and pray for each other so that you may be healed. The earnest prayer of a righteous person has great power and produces wonderful results. Elijah was a human as we are, and yet when he prayed earnestly that no rain would fall, none fell for 3.5 years. Then when he prayed again, the sky sent down rain, and the earth began to yield its crops. My dear brothers and sisters, if anyone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, you can be sure that whoever brings that sinner back from wandering will save that person from death and bring about the forgiveness of many sins." This is a funny closing off compared to the likes of Paul. There is no sign off, love from James, P.S., do your best, or anything like that. He just kind of finishes. That's it. This is how he ends his letter. And so today's going to be a little bit of a summary of these last verses and a little bit of a summary of the whole letter. But to start us off, I had a friend at uni called Ian. And Ian was a very funny little man. Is the nicest way I can describe him, and probably most accurate as well. He was absolutely lovely. He was meek, mild. He was quite short, and he was fairly quiet, softly spoken. And I think he had a Nigerian background, although you'd never know it from his persona. He wasn't what you typically imagine a Nigerian man to be like, but nice and slight and calm and quiet. Until, that is, he would pray. Then he would become properly like Nigerian, exactly as you imagine a Nigerian to pray. For Ian, prayer was never something casual. It was always serious and important. It wasn't a quick action. It was a passionate battle and a dialogue between him and God. And it was never loud or in your face. It was a very much an individual thing for him that he enjoyed praying and chatting to God. Although it was in the Nigerian style, so it was still quite loud and obvious. I don't think I've ever met anyone who would pray quite like Ian, though. Even in informal settings, when it came to time to pray, he would pray without using any fancy words, any flowery or wishy-washy language, but he would still take it very seriously in this battle and this petition to God, wrestling with him for whatever we were asking for. We both stayed in halls at uni, and one of my highlights of uni is just walking past his room at silly hours in the morning or late at night, and you would hear him respectfully but still noisily praying and pacing around his room. He did his dissertation on spiritual warfare. Yeah, so that tells you a lot about his character as well. And I think a lot of that came out in his prayer life. That when he was praying, it wasn't just muttering some words. It wasn't this relaxed, calm, unimportant thing. It was a real battle. When I think about Ian, I also bizarrely think about a lady called Hannah in the Bible. Many of you will know the story of Hannah, or many of you will know of the story of Samuel. And if not, Hannah is a silent, blubbering mess of prayer. She goes to the temple after not being able to have a child, and she prays, and as I said, a silent, blubbering mess, tears down her face as she longed for a child. and stylistically completely the opposite from Ian, and yet just as powerful and just as serious and just as battling and wrestling with God. I hope if you've learned anything from James as we've been going through it, that James is all about action and doing. It is about putting our faith into action. This is what the whole letter is about. It's not about specifically what we should think or believe or how much we know or how much we should study. It's not even about how we should run our church services or what we should do as best practice. It's about how we should behave in our own personal lives and the transformation that will have the rest of the church. So as James has already said, don't just listen to what God says, but do it. True and genuine faith is only known by your actions, and your life displays it. It is no good spouting off the most articulate and convincing arguments for anything if your life doesn't back it up, is the general message of James. And it mirrors up nicely from Jesus' words to his disciples, where he says in John, "You will know my disciples by how much theology we know and how many Bibles we give out." Exactly. Not quite. Jesus says, "A new command I give you." Give out lots of Bibles. No, love one another. As I have loved you, you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And so this is basically what James is doing. James says, people will know that you are Jesus' disciples by the way that you live your life, by the way that you are kind with your tongue, you are humble, you are wise, you are free of selfishness, you don't show favoritism, you don't get into fights, you don't judge each other, and so many more throughout the letter. So remembering these couple of verses and remembering that James is all about behaviour and action, James calls us to pray. Prayer is an essential part of James's doing in faith. They can't be separated. We can't do what God wants us to do without continually coming to him in prayer. And this wonderful quote, "If we are truly communing with the Holy God, our prayer life will fuel us for doing the work he has called us into for the rest of our life." Being doers of the word requires that we are also people of constant, honest, wrestling prayer. So I wonder what James quite had in mind when he was talking about this sort of prayer. I don't know exactly. I don't know whether he was thinking of anything specific or not. I wonder if he was imagining Ian, or if he was imagining Hannah, or if he was imagining someone in between perhaps. But following on from lots of sections of James, he says that we can so often resort to grumbling or gloating. And James reminds us, don't grumble, don't gloat, be people of prayer, be people of praise. I think, to be honest, we're probably nearer the moaning and the gloating more often than we are prayer and praise. But for James, it's a clear reminder for us to be active doing prayers and active doing praises. In typical James fashion, though, obviously that's quite hard to do. Or at least some of the time. And the reason I share about Ian is because I think he was a great example of this. It wasn't slip a quick prayer up to God and hope for the best. Not that there's anything specifically wrong with that, but that wasn't his default. It was a much more active, consistent and continuous way of praying. And I think while his style and his expression of prayer is quite different from me, stylistically, it's not really like my personality to pray like Ian. It was a massive challenge to me while I was at uni, and it still is, about my own prayer life. Ian's prayer was properly doing prayer. It was a physical thing as he paced around his room and he spoke out loud even though he was on his own. It's worth saying that's not, of course, the only way to pray. And the most important thing about prayer is that you do it regardless of how it's done. And prayer, I think, is quite a spiritual word, or at least we can turn it into quite a spiritual word. Whereas actually it's just talking with God. If you are talking with God, you are praying. If you are asking him for something, you are praying. If you are angry at him, that is praying. If you're swearing at him, that's praying. Doesn't matter how we talk to God, only the most important thing is that we do. He already knows how we're feeling, so we might as well tell him. It's one of my favourite ways of talking about prayer. There's a wonderful bit that I feel like I should have really talked about, although I didn't really prepare, about this middle part, James, about offering a prayer in faith. And it mirrors, again, lots of what Jesus taught. It mirrors lots about what Jesus taught about your faith has healed you, one of the great lines of the New Testament, where basically Jesus would encounter people time and time again, and they would ask for healing, or they wouldn't ask for healing. They would do something, or they wouldn't even do anything. But Jesus could recognize that their faith was so strong and so bold and so active that their faith healed them. And so for you guys at Anna, and particularly for Monty this morning, that is a great act of faith. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that God is going to heal you immediately. It may mean that God never heals you, and we have to wrestle with that, and we don't quite understand that. But there is a wonderful thing about a prayer offered in faith. So that was the bit that I wasn't going to talk about. So you can go and explore that for yourself through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and through James as well, if you like. Finally, wrapping us up with the last couple of verses in James. The last few verses perhaps are a bit of a strange finisher. I don't know what James had in mind, as I said, but it feels a bit different to what you might expect the letter of James to be about. But I'm going to read it to you, actually, because why not? And we can have the words on the screen from verse, or just 19 and 20. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, if someone among you wanders away from the truth and is brought back, you can be sure that whoever brings that sinner back from wandering will save that person from death and bring about the forgiveness of many sins." As I was writing this, I was a bit like, what's going on here? I don't quite get it. Because probably, at least as a first reading, it feels very evangelistic, this. It feels very much reaching out and looking out and reaching the lost and all those sort of ways of describing it, reaching those who aren't Christians or don't have any faith or don't know God or Jesus. But remember, the beginning of the letter, James says, to Christians everywhere. He then also says in these words, if someone among you wanders away from the truth, and so on. And so perhaps unusually, perhaps surprisingly, James here is talking about Christians who have lost their way a little bit. If someone among you wanders away from the truth, not if a stranger or a non-Christian wanders away from the truth, because in that case, they didn't have the truth to begin with. And in all honesty, once again, I don't quite know what James is up to here. I don't know quite what he had in mind as he wrote this. But I think it ties in quite nicely to so much of the other bits of writing that James does in this letter. It's one of those things that doesn't always apply to us, but will certainly apply to us at times. At times, the most fervent, the most hardened Christian, the most respectable Christian will be swayed and will be led by things other than Jesus. There is no shame in that. It's it's a part of life that's going to happen. We all face challenges and it will impact our faith. And at times it can be something probably quite innocent sounding. So, I like to pick on Martin, so it's a nice easy one that I can say. Sometimes we can be swayed and led by football rather than Jesus. Not saying that Martin is, mind you, but, it's good to pick on Martin if I can. Probably not anyway about the football, but it seems quite trivial and innocent, but perhaps it might be something more serious sounding. It might be a political view or political movement, a particular worship style or denomination, or extremely common and perhaps most dangerous, a particular pastor or preacher. And of course, I realise the irony that I'm the one at the front saying that. Follow Jesus. Don't follow the pastor. Don't follow the preacher. Don't follow a particular style or denomination. Don't follow a particular political view or movement over Jesus. Like with so much of the Bible, there's nothing wrong with having a particular political view. There's nothing wrong with being an activist in a certain area that you're passionate about. But But don't let that take priority over Jesus. Follow Jesus first. A good pastor will direct you to Jesus in a whole host of different ways. But you'll see time and time again in the news, following a charismatic, charming leader over Jesus will lead to deep pain and hurt. And like all the things above, Jesus will never let you down and he'll never fail you. And a wonderful little quote here from some of my research in this. If our community of faith is more focused on following the views of a political party, a country, a leader, an ideology, or even a pastor, and we are focused on Christ, that needs to change. And then quoting from Ephesians, he says, we have one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and through all and in all. And once again with James, he's directing it at us directly. Unfortunately, this is a reminder to look out for other people who may have wandered from the faith, but it is also a warning and a behavioural check-in that we are not wandering either. And then if we have been led astray, if we have wandered maybe only slightly, we need to have the humility to be led back by those who are looking at Jesus, not to fight them about it, not to call out the plank in our own eye and all that sort of thing. So there you go. A very brief look at the last few verses of James. It's been a challenge. I hope you've enjoyed the challenge. I hope you felt the challenge too. I'm going to let you into a little secret, and I cheated on my last paragraph of this. We've been doing Youth Alpha at the moment, and we talked a couple of weeks ago a lot about AI. And so I was in a bit of a rush this week, admittedly. So this is partly a confession and partly a me being humble before you, but I asked AI to summarise the letter of James for me. Naughty, naughty. For no other reason than partly I was interested, actually. I thought I will write, but it'd be interesting to see what what AI came up with. And actually, it was really nice what AI came up with. So you might want to take this with a pinch of salt. It's up to you, but it is an accurate summarising of James. The letter of James is a punchy, practical letter that rolls up its sleeves and asks faith to prove it is alive through actions. It calls believers to resilient patience, especially in trials, and insists that real trust in God shows up in action. Words matter. Anger smoulders. Favoritism corrodes. Wealth can wobble the soul. Wisdom, though, descends like a clean rain and grows a harvest of peace. James paints faith not as a framed certificate, but as a lived reality, visible in mercy, integrity, humility, and care for the vulnerable. And then the particularly challenging bit, faith works, or it is no faith at all. And that is certainly one of the key takeaways from me. Faith works, or it is no faith at all. And my second takeaway, as I mentioned last week with Caroline as well, that it's been so challenging to have James call out all our bad behaviour and make us realise that everything that James warns of, we have unfortunately also been guilty of doing ourselves. So perhaps over the next week, as we move on to something completely different now, you might want to reread James, having done the study of it. You may want to rewatch mine and others' talks on James on YouTube. With all that in mind, James is about doing, but it is also calling out our own challenging behaviour.